Hi everyone, I'm so blessed. Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to continue our beginner's guide to container gardening, and we're on episode 4 now. So let's get started. In this episode, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about choosing the right plants for our containers. If you want to have a successful container garden, you must choose wisely the plants that you select to go in the containers for your container garden. If you want them to be healthy, you want them to thrive, develop, and grow and produce. So what are some of the key factors that we need to consider when we choose our plants? We want to look at the containers that we're going to use for the container garden. We also want to make sure that we look at the growth habits of the particular plants that we're selecting, and we also want to look at what the right light requirements are for those particular plants that we choose. So I want to kind of move around my container garden and give you some examples of what I mean when I say that the container is crucial to the type of plant that you select to grow in your container garden. Here's an example of growing herbs in small containers. As you can see, it works quite well. I'm able to stack the small containers on vertical shelves, and it saves me space. Now I have a larger pot here on the deck itself, and I've got a tomato plant in here. I've also got a few herbs in here as well, and I'm going to explain why I did this. And then here's another 20-inch pot example where I'm using to grow pepper plants. Things like mint, herbs can do well in small containers because you are constantly harvesting that particular plant. So the only thing that the container is doing is holding the root ball and the medium that you're using to feed it its nutritional value. So at the end of the season, nearing the first frost, it's going to die back anyway, and the only thing that's going to be left in the container is the actual root ball itself, and you'll leave that until the next production season rolls around. So really the foliage that grows out of that container, you're going to harvest over and over again during that season. So small containers, herbs like mint can do well in a small container. But on the other hand, other plants like tomatoes and peppers, they tend to need a much larger container. If you're growing a plant like an indeterminate tomato plant, most of that plant will remain in that container for the full season, and what you are doing is harvesting the fruit from that plant. That is why you need a much larger container than if you're just growing an herb. Now you can put herbs in a larger container, you can put several in there as well, and they will spread out, but that's not, you're not looking for them to spread out, you're just looking for them to continue to produce upward growth that you're going to harvest or cut back. So smaller containers, you can do herbs, you can do things like mint, and they will work well. But for other plants like tomatoes, pepper plants, cucumber plants, that actually need to maintain their foliage throughout the growing season, you need a much larger container for that. Another thing, or I should say a key factor that you should consider when you're selecting your plants is the light requirement. Make sure that you're researching or at least looking at the labels of the plants that you're buying. If you're buying from a big box store or a nursery, look at the light requirements, because where you place your plant in its container is going to determine how well it does also. You want to look to see, is it something that requires full sun? Do you have the space to put the container at the particular size that you have in an area that gets direct full sun? And that's like generally 6 to 8 hours of direct sun is what we consider full sun. Is the plant a variety that needs partial shade. Do you have space in your container garden to put the size of container that you have for that plant that that plant requires in a partial shaded area? Or maybe it needs to be in a fully shaded area. So those are things that you need to consider also when you're selecting your plant. What does your plant need to grow, and can you accommodate that? An example that I can give you of light requirements is lettuce. Lettuce tends to do a lot better in shaded areas. So do you have a partially shaded or shaded area where you can grow lettuce in a container? Maybe you don't. But if you choose that plant, you're going to have to find some kind of way to accommodate that or to simulate that situation so that that lettuce can produce. For example, let me show you here. I have these raised bed containers here that are up against the back side of my house that has a little bit of an overhang. So that gives it partial shade. I also have next to it an umbrella that gives it additional shade. So I can grow lettuce here. I've already grown my lettuce for the season and harvested, and it's now summertime. That's why I do not have any more lettuce here in these beds. But that's an example. Where are you going to put the container? And then you also want to make sure that you are selecting a variety of that plant that can not only can be accommodated by the light requirements, the container that you're using, but also the heat temperatures. So we'll talk about climate in just a second. Yes, your local climate should influence your plant choice. Okay, now there are some more advanced gardeners out there, and you'll see them here on YouTube. They do grow outside the parameters of what is recommended for their particular climate, and you will often hear them refer to their climate as their growing zone. So basically, what does that mean? You want to choose or select plants that are well suited for your area. Pay close attention to your temperatures for each season, as well as your humidity levels. That can make a difference in the health of the plants that you're trying to grow. So I know you're looking for an example of that. Let me just give you one. If you live in a hot, dry climate, you might want to consider plants like succulents, cacti. An herb that I can think of is like lavender. But if you live in a climate that tends to be cooler or wetter, you might want to consider plants like kale. Kale does well. That's one of my favorites, by the way. Kale and mint do well in climates that are cooler and wetter. When you're selecting your plants, think of the specific purpose and why you want to grow that plant. Your container garden can be what you want it to be. There are so many options. If you use those key factors when selecting them, there are so many varieties of plants out there now that you can probably find what you want to grow in the variety that grows well in your climate, whether that be flowers, that be vegetables, or herbs. As a beginner gardener, I want you to be successful coming out the gate. So I want you to choose vegetables. If you're going to grow a vegetable garden, I want you to choose the ones that are easy to grow. I think the ones that are easy to grow are tomato plants, pepper plants, and lettuce. Maybe you should start there. You can also grow an herb garden in your container garden, or you can just add it to your vegetable plants. It's really up to you to decide what you want to grow. But some easy growing herbs, maybe like basil, parsley, thyme, rosemary, those are some easy choices. Remember, I said you can mix and match. You can have a variety. You can have a combination of a lot of different things. You can even add flowers to your container garden if you're growing a vegetable and herb garden, or a vegetable or an herb garden. A pop of color is always nice, and you can choose something like geraniums or marigolds. When you're selecting plants for your container garden, don't just think about the one plant that you can put in that container, but you also want to consider what plants grow well together. We call that companion planting. An example of that might be basil and tomato. They grow well together. You can put them in that same, remember you're going to put a tomato plant in a larger pot anyway. So why not add some basil on the side of that? Why would you do that? They grow well together. They don't disturb each other. They actually thrive together. The basil herb plant actually helps to protect or repel pests that usually harm your tomato plants. So planting them together as a companion planting situation is beneficial. I do encourage you, and I say this in every episode, do your own research. When you know which plants you want to select, do your own research, not just to determine what other plants are good companions for those plants, but also for the maintenance of those plants, what kind of fertilizers, what are the light requirements, and the best size containers for that specific plant that you want to grow. Okay, so that's it for today's episode on selecting plants for your container garden. In our next episode, we're going to talk about planting and transplanting techniques. Make sure you subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss out. Leave your questions and your comments below and let us know what plants you're intending to grow in your container garden. Thanks for watching and happy gardening. I'm going to see you in the next episode.